Now that you've done your basic cape, I'm going to show you how to decorate, and we're going to show you the feather version. So we're going to put our cape face down on the table or floor. If your cape is really big, you might find it a little bit more comfortable to do this on the floor. And we're going to mark the feathers. So we're going to mark where the feathers are going to lie. So you're going to need your tape measure for this, and you will also need a erasable pencil or a tailor's chalk, whichever you have on hand. So the first thing you want to do is, I'm going to use inches. So just lay your tape measure straight down the center back of the cape, and you're going to start where the seam at the back of the hood is, and just lay it straight down such that you can mark a line every 2 inches from where the tape is laid. So this is the size 3 to 4, and I have an approximate length in the back of about 17 1/4. So I've marked my first series of markings. So this first mark over here is my first 2-inch mark, and I just carry on marking down the center back in 2-inch increments. So starting off here, what I want to do now is I want to keep my finger on the tip of the tape measure, and I just want to swing it out to one side. So if you're working, it could be either the left side or the right side, because we're going to work with one side first, and then we're going to repeat this process on the other side of the cape. So we're going to go ahead and do the same markings every 2 inches down the cape towards the hem. So that's the second row done. We're going to swing it once again and repeat. And the important thing is to keep the base mark the same. So just put your finger there as you swing the tape measure out towards the side. And this is a little bit of a time-consuming process, and you know, if you're making this cape for a little one, you could get them involved in the process. I think it'll be fun. It's always fun when you include children into the craft projects, and that way they can get an affinity, or you know, a love for crafting as well. And it's also an excellent craft to do in front of the TV. If you're watching a show or something, I never like to have my hands idle. So I'm always crafting in front of the TV. How about you? So we're almost reaching the other end of the cape. So here we have the seam that meets the center of the cape with the side, and we'll just go ahead and mark that one too. A little bit of bulk here, depending on what type of fabric you've chosen for your cape. And we'll just make one last row of markings right here. And here we go. So we've got all our markings in. They are a little bit faint right now. What we're going to do is we're going to come back at a later step and just draw these in. What you need to do right now is repeat this process on the other side of the cape. So if you've worked on the right side of the cape, you're going to repeat this process on the left side of the cape. And just remember that we are making these markings on the right side of the fabric, not the lining side of the fabric, because we're going to be sewing in the feathers on this side. So these help as indicators as to where we're going to place our feathers in the next step. So go ahead and do the markings on the other side of the cape now. Now that we have drawn our markings all around the circle of the cape, what we're going to do is I'm going to use a pen just so it's a little bit clearer on camera. Feel free to go ahead and use a tailor's chalk, or erasable, washable ink tailor's pen, because you don't want the markings to be permanent there. Although they're going to be covered up by the feathers anyway, but either way, we're just going to make these markings, and you want to, because you see you've got the lines all drawn in, so you just want to connect those lines, and in doing so, it will make placing of the feathers so much easier. So you just want to connect those dots or lines that you've drawn earlier, so they are at 2-inch increments. Just go ahead and do that all around the cape. So it gets a little bit more difficult as the markings get a little bit further. So if you're doing this and if you really want to be a little bit more precise, then you can grab your quilting ruler or any transparent ruler for that matter, and just to make sure that you are keeping in line with your 2-inch placement. So I've got my quilting ruler, and I'm just going to use it to just be sure that I am keeping up with my 2-inch indicator as I go. Now, it's a bit of eyeballing. You don't need to have perfection at this step because it's going to be covered up by the feathers anyway, and there are so many feathers that it's not going to be obvious if it is just a little bit off, but you want it roughly about 2 inches, because where there is a shortage of 2 inches at one side, it's going to add up as you go down the lines. So we've done the first 3 rows. Go ahead and do this for the remainder of the rows until you've reached the hem of the cape. Just a quick tip before I finish up my lines, I just wanted to show you here. This is where I free-handed it, and as you see, I missed out about 3 millimeters of my mark. So I'm just going to show you what I am doing to try and keep my lines as concentric circles as possible. So I've got a section, most of it is done, so I've got a section that I've left undone so I can show you on camera. And so this is my sewing ruler, and it's graduated in inches, and I can see it clearly when I place my ruler down this way. So I have done it till here, and well, let's use this side. So you see every marking can be seen through the ruler, and that's the benefit of using a transparent ruler. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a little bit of a zoom so you can see a little bit clearer of what I'm doing right here. So I've got 2, 4, 6, and so the next marking I'm going to aim at is the 8 marking. So a science teacher once told me that in drawing graphs, it's always easier to curve your hand this way when you're making markings rather than this way. So I'm going to change my angle just a little bit real quick. This way, yeah. So I'm going to join the 10 mark with this line that I've drawn previously. Again, it's easier to do this off camera. There we go. And I'm just going to continue with the next panel just to show you exactly what I mean. So here I have my 0 marker up there, my 2, 4. So I'm going to join this line to the 6 mark here. However, I would not recommend skipping the first step of making the initial markings, because that is important. That helps to guide you along as well. So this is just an insurance to see that you are getting your lines in that 2-inch increments. And it's always this largest line that's a little bit more tricky than the rest, because there's that bigger gap down there that you need to fill in. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish this off So I've got my marking there, and I just want to make sure that I intersect that as I go. Once again, this takes a little bit of time, but it's all worth the effort because you're going to want your feathers. For all this effort that you're putting into making this beautiful cape, you want your feathers to sit in the right alignment and the right placement. Just finishing off. When we reach the next side seam, then I can show you how beautiful this is looking. So I'm going to open it up and this is my hood, and these are the lines that I've drawn, and these are gonna show me where I'm going to be placing the feathers. So I'm happy with how this is looking, and we're going to talk about the feathers now. So we are ready to prepare our feathers for our cape, and I've decided to go for a macaw theme. So there's a rough guide in the tutorial about how many feathers you need for each size of cape you're sewing approximately, but if you choose to pack the feathers in closer, you will need a greater number than that, or if you wish to space them out a little bit more, then you will need lesser feathers than is stated in the guide. So I have tallied the number of feathers I have, and I'm going to set these aside for a minute. So our macaw is going to have a long tail at the end, and I am using this beautiful glitter felt, and I'm going to show you how to cut it into the shape of tail feathers. So I'm going to want about 3 to 4. Let's see how many I can get out of these 2 A4 felt sheets. So what you're going to need for this bit is, if you're going to do tail feathers, you're going to need your pattern template for 1 feather. This is our pattern piece for our feathers, and I have used this to trace over my felt sheets again and again and again, and you can see that the edges are a little bit worn. So if you find that you're going to be making a lot of capes and you're going to be wanting to use this template over and over again, I have a tip for you. You could buy a thick mylar sheet or an acetate-like sheet, and you could trace this template onto that sheet and then cut it out such that it forms a rigid template rather than using the paper template again and again to go over onto your felt or your fabric. And what that helps to do is it helps to make your pattern piece just a little bit more durable to wear and tear. So if you find that you're going to be making a lot of capes or tracing a lot of feathers, that is definitely a handy tip. So here's what you're going to need for the next section. You're going to need your felt for the tail feathers or any other fabric that does not fray at the edges. You're going to need your pattern piece for the feathers. You will need a ruler, so best if it's a transparent ruler, and you will also need something to mark the fabric with. So I'm using water erasable pen here. So we're going to go ahead right now. I'm going to do the marking on the reverse side of the felt, so not on the glitter side. What I want to do is, first I want to mark the very top of the pattern piece. So that's going to give me my curve. And some water erasable pens take a little bit of time to show their marking. Be patient with that. So it doesn't look like it's being marked right now, but it's there, just very, very faint. And I'm going to just mark down the sides just a little bit, just so I know which way I'm cutting downwards. And then I want to just grab my ruler, and I want to mark So I'll put this at the 1-inch guide right there, and I want my tail feathers to be long. I want it to be about 10 inches. So I'm going to mark the exact center. So I'm going to follow this line on my ruler all the way down and mark that point right there. Down there is my center point. I also am going to mark the straight lines downwards. So my feather is sitting 1/2 of an inch from the edge of my felt. So I just want to draw that dotted line down this way, so it gives me a guide when I'm moving my pattern piece down this way, so it will not move about. So now that I've moved my pattern piece down, what I'm going to do is just copy the shape of the base of the feather. So I want that lovely U shape. And just go over it a few times just to make sure that the marking is transferred. And that's what we're going after. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can take a look. And for the top, so just like I measured this earlier, I'm just going to bring my ruler across, make sure that it's lying straight. So I want to make sure I've got a line that's parallel to the edge of the fabric. And then you can go ahead and just draw a straight line upwards. So the length of this feather is about 10 3/4 inches from midpoint to tip. 10 3/4. So I want to make the other two feathers just slightly shorter so that it looks like a little bit of a V cut at the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut this one out and use the first feather as a template for my second feather. So now that I have my longer tail feathers, I'm going to go ahead and do the similar process for the shorter feathers that are going to be at the sides of the longer feathers. And what I want to do is, so this is as we measured 10 3/4 inches, we measured before. So I'm going to make this just slightly shorter. I think I'm going to make these about 9.5 inches. So I'm going to follow just exactly the same steps that I did earlier. Now remember that I am sewing a child size cape, or if you're going to be sewing this for yourself or an older child, you may want to adjust the size of the feathers to be longer, or if you're going to be sewing a full size cape, you know, you may want shorter or longer feathers. You can adjust them accordingly. It's a very easy fix. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this now. We are now ready to affix the feathers to the lower part of our cape. The first thing that we are going to do is to move the elastics and the neck fastening out of the way. Starting with either end of the cape, take one feather and overlap it over the edge by about 1/2 an inch. Pin it down, and we will continue pinning feathers with an overlap of approximately 1 inch across the lowest line on the cape. Continue pinning until you reach the other end of the cape. I will now show you how we will be pinning the feathers for a cape which has tail feathers like the one we are making. So to begin, we fold the cape onto itself in half such that we can find the middle point of the hem of the cape. You would then Evenly spread the tail feathers that you have cut out across the area in the center of that hem. For this tutorial, I have cut out 2 longer tail feathers and 2 slightly shorter tail feathers. So right in the center of that marked point, I am affixing the 2 longer feathers and just beside those, the 2 shorter feathers. Be sure to anchor these feathers firmly down with some pins. We will now resume pinning our regular size feathers on either side of these larger tail feathers. In our Cape-tastic video sew along series, we will be sewing row by row, which is a little bit different to how you would see it done in the tutorial that comes with the Cape-tastic pattern. Now that we've got the first row all pinned in, we're going to go ahead and sew from the leftmost corner all the way across the hem to the rightmost corner. We are now at the sewing machine ready to sew our feathers in. For the purpose of this sew, I will be using a contrasting thread. Also, don't forget to check that your bobbin is filled up and ready to go. As you begin sewing, don't forget to backstitch as you start the seam. Go slowly. There are lots of pins in this project, so just be careful, take your time. You are sewing through three layers, and depending on the thickness of your main fabric and your lining fabric, plus your feathers, it is very important for you to use the right type of needle. So just be careful, test your stitch out on a scrap piece of fabric before you start sewing, and most importantly, be calm, be patient, take your time, and you'll get through this. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew from one corner. So I'm starting here on the extreme left corner, and I'm sewing my way across to the extreme right corner of the very first and lowest layer of feathers on my Cape-tastic hem. Now that we have completed the first row of feathers at the hem of our cape, go ahead and pin in your next layer. And when you're done pinning your second layer of feathers, go ahead and sew it just the same way we did the first layer of feathers, starting from one corner, working your way till the other end of the cape. So just as you have done the first and the second layer, go ahead and pin in your third, fourth, and other layers one by one and sew them until you get to the very top. At the top, you will have the smallest circle, so just be careful when you're pinning in the feathers for that layer. It will have to overlap a fair bit in order for you to achieve that curve. So we have gone ahead and finished up our cape, and let me just remove this real quick so you can see how the topmost row of feathers will lie. As you can see, I have put in 4 feathers in our topmost row. Because the topmost row is such a tight curve, you're going to have to layer the feathers in a little bit of a different way than we have been layering the previous row of feathers. So they're going to overlap at a little bit of a diagonal to each other, and basically you want to make sure that you are covering the area underneath the feathers, so basically the cape mane. So now that we've done this, what we're going to go ahead and do is, you see a lot of threads hanging around the edges, hanging off the edges, and you see that some of the feathers are overlapping. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to neaten up the edges, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to clip off the excess feathers. But while we're at it, now remember, I always talk about how we should be careful about making sure that your other bits don't get caught in your sewing. Well, I've gone ahead and done just that. So if you can see over here, I have accidentally sewn down my fastening strap, the neck fastening strap. So I've got a little bit of unpicking to do here, and then I'm going to go ahead and re-sew this layer of feathers. And before I go on, I also want to mention a little something here. So you can see that most of my feathers are felt. And the reason we chose felt is because the edges don't fray. And earlier on in the videos, I also mentioned that apart from scrap, apart from felt, you can use any other fabrics that don't fray, and I mentioned knit as one of them. So just to illustrate that, I have actually done my deeper red and the orange feathers in a lightweight knit. And as I was sewing this, I realized that felt was a little bit heavy, and this knit that I chose, it's not cotton lycra, it's a little bit like sporting knit. It doesn't stretch very much. And here it illustrates the fact that knits don't fray either. So the only thing that you want to be careful of when you're sewing your feathers, and if you're doing your feathers in knit, is that you either want to use a walking foot, or you want to make sure that your knit feathers do not stretch as you go, because I had a little bit of problem with this. As you can see, a little bit of the pleats over here. So you'd want to make sure, because knit has a property in that it stretches, which felt doesn't. So felt is easy to sew. Knit can give you just a little bit of difficulty. You can preempt that by using a walking foot. So I'm going to go ahead and neaten up the threads at the side, and then I'm going to show you how to cut down the feathers such that they would be ready for top stitching. So I have gone back, unpicked and freed the neck fastening that was caught in my sewing, and I'm going to flip this away for a moment as I prepare to cut off the excess feathers. Now, flipping over to the other side, just take a moment and admire how beautiful your lines of stitching look. It also helps to hold down the lining as your child is playing with your cape, or playing with his or her cape, and it doesn't flap around on the inside. So just a beautiful two-in-one effect of holding down the feathers and holding down that lining at the same time. So as we prepare to snip away the excess of the feathers that's protruding out of the sides of the cape, you just want to take care to pin away the elastic and the neck fastening. So the feathers extend way above the to almost the base of the hood, so I want to pull the hood forward, and I can see where the feathers start and where they end. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to grab my fabric shears, and I just want to trim off as a straight line just down this whole way, and taking care not to snip the fabric off the cape itself. Let me grab my scissors real quick. And starting from the base, just very slowly slicing off the excess. So take care at the hood, because the feathers go right onto the hood, so you just want to make sure that you don't catch any of the stitching in your trimming as well, or any of the main part of the cape. So clear away the excess. Now we're going to look at this from the front side of the cape. So I decided to go with a red felt piece for the very top of the feathers, and I want to stick it down this way. So let me show you how we're going to do this. So before I pin this in, let's observe that there is a curved line up here, and I want the top edge of my topmost feather to overhang that, because what we're going to do is, as we stitch this in, then I'm going to go in and cut it to lie exactly along the curve later on. So we're going to sew it a little bit below that curve, and let me just pin this feather in. And also you want to position it such that it completely covers the main fabric that you can see if you didn't put this last feather in. So just pop your pins down. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to trim it down to size. So you know what, I am going to pin it this way so that the heads of my pins are not blocking me as I trim. So if you notice, I have used a bright colored thread for this tutorial. You would use a color that complements your feather. So if you don't want the threads to be noticeable, you could also use nylon thread. It's a little bit trickier to sew with, but then you don't get any visible threads. I have used a contrast color so that it can show in the video. So I'm just going to grab my fabric shears, and I want to trim this down to size. If you want, you can trace it off, which is what I'm going to do, so I get a precise angle that I'm looking for. And I'm going to trim this off first. So notice that once you've trimmed off the top of this feather, the curve on this topmost feather follows the curve on the base of the cape exactly. This is what we're going to do next. So as I've done so on the right hand side of my cape, I'm going to go ahead and trim the feathers down so that they form a neat little straight line. And then if you want to pin the feathers, you may. If you choose not to, you may omit this step as well. Before we go on, don't forget to release the neck fastening, because we're going to be top stitching and you do not want to unpick for the second time around. So here's what we're going to go ahead and do. First things first, you're going to trim this down to size so that it lies like a nice straight line. Then you're going to, if you want to, pin the feathers down. And then the third step is we're going to top stitch all the way from the bottom of the left hand side of the cape down to the center feather, so we can secure this down, and to the right hand bottom of the cape too. Here we have the basic capelet that we have finished, and I just want to show you the hood. And then we have gone in and fixed in the feathers. And you can be really creative when it comes to the feathers, so just take a look at the end of the tutorial, the pictures at the end of the tutorial, and you can see loads of amazing ideas of how you can personalize the feathers for your cape. So just want to also point out that we've also done the tail feathers, and I love how they look. And we're going to set this aside now because we are going to go on to our hack for the Capetastic. So I am going to show you how we can personalize this cape to turn it into a dinosaur cape. And that's going to be so exciting. Stay tuned for that.